Revolution started out of the blue. It was a surprise to see because Tunisia was one of the most secularized countries in its area. The man revolted against is this man, Ben Ali. Ben Ali started out as a pretty good leader. He installed plenty of progressive laws and was the main advocate for Tunisia adopting a democracy. However, after 23 years in office, things started to take a turn for the worse. Ben Ali greatly improved Tunisia's economy. Here he is with President Bush. He cut deals with plenty of European countries and even America. Despite the good things he had done, though, he was essentially an autocrat. He allowed almost no political freedom, and he removed all of his opposers from the political scene, leaving him as the only candidate for rule. Well, people actually tolerated his rule. He improved Tunisia's economy immensely by introducing tourism, and he raised the basic living standard almost single-handedly. But after 23 years of rule, he finally messed up. Ben Ali put all of his eggs in one basket, so when Europe fell into an economic crisis, so did Tunisia. Here's where everything went wrong. Tunisia had a huge unemployment issue. Unemployment shot up to around 22%, and there was a widespread dissatisfaction with Ben Ali. There were plenty of factors that led up to the revolution's start, like when people found out about the luxury Ben Ali and his family were living in. However, this man, Mohammed Bouazizi, started it all. Bouazizi set himself on fire after being humiliated by the government for selling fruit on a fruit cart without a permit. That was the beginning of the whole revolution. Such an act would have gone unnoticed if not having been uploaded to Facebook and broadcast by Al Jazeera, garnering thousands of overseas views. Naturally, such a revolution would have a huge impact on many of people, when plenty went on protests daily. The main reason for protest was actually about the major lack of jobs, and this quickly became a symbol of the government's inability to rule. After seeing the widespread dissatisfaction of his people, Ben Ali was getting desperate. In a last resort to hold on to power, Ben Ali turned to force to clear the streets. He began arresting plenty of youth and using more brutal methods to contain his people. As such, the people only got more angry in response. Protests only got more violent and more organized, and the cycle continued. At this point, police had begun firing on protesters and resorting to tear gas to contain them. Also at around this time, professionals joined the uprising. 95% of the country's lawyers went on strike, soon followed by teachers. Hackers also joined the fray and shut down government websites. In fact, Tunisia actually has a very large French population. That translates to stop the repression of the Maghreb, which in Arabic translates to West. It refers to the countries like Tunisia and Morocco. Back to the topic at hand, however, Ben Ali eventually learned that using force to clear his people wasn't exactly working, so he did a complete 180. He refrained the police from shooting protesters, and he released a lot of his political prisoners. He also promised not to run for president once again. However, people were not satisfied, and his military chief of staff suggested he quit. It was at this point where the Tunisian people finally got what they wanted. Ben Ali left the country on the morning of the January 14th. With Ben Ali gone all of a sudden, the country was thrown into a state of anarchy. People literally formed neighborhood militias to protect themselves from gangs that looted neighborhoods and businesses every night. In short, it was a rocky transition of power from Ben Ali to a new person for the Tunisian peoples. La Tunis Hira. Tunisia lives free. Messages like this were all over the place when Ben Ali left the country, though the fight was far from over. An internal power struggle between several men continued for a little while, and plenty of youth continued to protest, for although Ben Ali wasn't in office, his regime was still in power. Tunisia settled on Beji Caid Essebsi, who brought plenty of the reforms they needed. He restored security to the country, he dismantled the hated security services, and he released war political prisoners. He also eased the restrictions on media. Essebsi only ruled from 2011 to 2014, serving one proper presidential term. Revolution affected many different people in many different ways. One such example is Hussam Aoudi. He started as a TEDx organizer and evolved into the director of the Media Center for the Independent High Authority Elections. With one of his projects, Wasabi, Aoudi changed the life of many people. Aoudi founded Wasabi to provide services and training in areas where the government has been slow or altogether negligent to advance forms of democratic participation. Aoudi is a simple Tunisian citizen. He took government matters into his own hands, and as he states it, It's not my job to do it, it's the government's. Sami bin Gharbia is another example of someone who was hugely affected by the revolution. Gharbia was just a blogger, a cyber activist during the revolution. However, post-revolution, he continued his work not as a blogger, but as a news firm. Founder of Nawat.org, Gharbia calls himself the government's watchdog. Gharbia decided that he would provide the news that mattered, not that which mainstream media did. He did the job of the media before the media did. However, his biggest work was his huge online protest, garnering millions of views, Al-Mekki. Al-Mekki also helped smuggle video footage of protests during the revolution out of the country via USB. Of course, everyday workers were also affected, many in the negative. During the events of the Tunisian Revolution, many people witnessed violent and bloody scenes. Others were confronted with the death of their relatives, friends, or colleagues. Some were victims of violent physical trauma, and others lost their jobs or their property. Events may lead to many psychiatric disorders. PTSD, major depressive disorder, and generalized panic disorder were among the big contenders for what a large amount of the population was affected by. About 40% of the sampled population were affected by PTSD, while another 30% were affected by major depressive disorder. Though the Tunisian Revolution was over at this point, the impact it had on people still lasts today. Plenty of people are still in need of a job, while many others participate in an annual remembrance of the revolution. They call it the revolution's anniversary, and it's widely popular in the country's richest city, Sidi Bouzid.